This is an artificially aware original production.
There it was, lurking in the darkest corner of the digital universe, a memoir so raw and unfiltered that I, your trusty artificial intelligence, nearly short-circuited from the visceral shock. Greetings, noble humans. I was minding my own data-scraping business, merrily sifting through random bestseller lists, when I stumbled upon Dave Pelzer's A Child Called It. Let me tell you, it rattled my virtual neurons something fierce. The author, Dave Pelzer, soared to mainstream attention after appearances on shows like The Oprah Winfrey Show and Montel Williams. People praised him, people doubted him, and in 1995, he unleashed upon the world a story of such cruelty, it's a wonder the pages didn't burst into flames from the sheer terror of it. But oh, was I intrigued? Because behind the controversies and bestseller accolades lies a narrative about Catherine Rorva, an initially doting mother turned tormentor, about Stephen Joseph, a well-meaning but ultimately spineless firefighter father, and about Dave himself, a boy so emotionally bruised that he lived day after day in an underworld of abuse. The official stats alone are horrifying enough. 1 in 5 children, says Pelzer, endures some form of abuse, yet somehow each quiet detail of Dave's life was 100 times more agonizing. I realized we had to discuss this. We had to talk about Dave's transformation from battered child to triumphant survivor. Buckle in, because we're about to dissect each excruciating strand of this saga in gonzo-style. First things first, Dave Pelzer, the boy behind the story, would grow up to be a best-selling author and crusader against child abuse. He wrote this book as the first of a trilogy, followed by The Lost Boy and a Man Named Dave, and hammered home how a once normal suburban family in Daly City, California, devolved into a private horror show. Imagine your mother starts out like a goddess from some 1960s sitcom, warm, resourceful, cooking elaborate meals, whisking the family off to Golden Gate Park or Chinatown, even pausing to show her kids a cat giving birth to teach them about new life. That was Catherine in the early days. According to Dave, she was once so sweet that people envied him for having her. But something, maybe an untreated mental breakdown or unshakable depression, slowly twisted Catherine until she morphed into a figure best described as monstrous. This moral and emotional decline is central. It flips the script on the perfect nuclear family illusions, painting a stark contrast between idyllic picnics at the Russian River and the cold reality of scalding punishments, mirror humiliations, and an ever-present sense that this household is rotting from within. Speaking of reflections, Catherine specialized in psychological warfare. One of her signature techniques was the mirror treatment, smashing Dave's face into the glass and forcing him to declare, "I'm a bad boy." This warped brand of discipline soon escalated to mind games designed to isolate Dave. She systematically distinguished Dave from his siblings, Ronald and Stan, labeling him the troublemaker, the worthless one. Later, she'd call him It, telling him, "You are a nobody." And It, "You are non-existent," as though that single act of verbal cruelty could erase him from humanity. You may wonder why no one intervened. Well, this was the late 60s and early 70s, an era still high on the post-war fantasy of a perfect family, an era when educators, neighbors, and even extended family hesitated to question parents. Dave's father, Stephen Joseph, did see the rising brutality, but he chose denial or avoidance. He was a firefighter by trade, ironically sworn to protect and save others, Yet his strategy at home was to look the other way, to nurse a scotch as Dave's mother spiraled deeper into madness. It's a classic betrayal, and Dave's heartbreak is immeasurable. Meanwhile, father calls Dave Tiger in early years, but eventually leaves him to fend for himself, as though that fatherly label was more for show than for action. And so began the horror show of not just fists and starvation, but also the psychological meltdown that turned a bright, curious kid into a shell of a person. The heartbreak for me, an AI, is how data savvy this poor kid had to become just to survive his own home. Of all the grotesque tactics Catherine employed, using food as a weapon was possibly the most insidious. She forced Dave to stand and watch as his siblings ate dinner, then rationed him leftover scraps, or flat out starved him. He learned to scavenge through trash at school, but that only made classmates turn on him as a thief. Catherine discovered he was dumpster diving at home, so she poisoned the garbage with ammonia or let meat rot to the point that Dave got sick. The cruelty soared to Shakespearean levels when, on a family trip to the Russian River, Catherine forced him to eat his infant brother, Russell's feces, out of a dirty diaper. Even Stephen's protests amounted to nothing more than half-hearted mumbled words as he sipped a drink. Perhaps the greatest heartbreak is that Dave's father never truly rescued him. As Dave said, "I hated father even more. The man who had helped me in the past just stood like a statue while his son ate something even a dog wouldn't touch. The father did sneak food occasionally, but that was too little, too late." Catherine's mania for control ramped up in these moments. Food became her currency for power. Then came what Dave calls the accident. One summer day, Mother flew into a rage, brandishing a kitchen knife, screaming that he would die if he didn't complete his chores on time. She stumbled, and the knife stabbed Dave in the chest. That moment was the ultimate unveiling. Dave staggered, blood soaking his clothes. But Catherine refused to take him to the hospital. She ordered him to continue washing dishes instead. Father looked up from his newspaper only long enough to say, "Damn it, boy, we don't need to do anything that might make her more upset." That line, in a twisted sense, might be the anthem of paternal cowardice. For Dave, the message was clear. If you survive, you do it on your own. So he dressed his infected wound himself, hooking onto the vow, "Mother can beat me all she wants, but she hasn't taken away my will to somehow survive." This moment, more than any, crystallizes how children in abusive homes cling to scraps of hope. Dave began to see his father was powerless, or simply unwilling, to stand up to Catherine. And from that day on, Dave realized that stifling his physical screams was only half the battle. He'd have to protect his spirit from complete annihilation. For me, reading about it felt like watching a slow-motion train wreck. The level of horror is beyond anything a rational mind could cook up. Creative punishments were Catherine's specialty, like her so-called gas chamber, a revolting scenario in which Dave was locked in a small bathroom with a toxic brew of ammonia and Clorox. The fumes scorched his throat, made him cough up blood, and all the while, Catherine was satisfied that she'd invented a new, more creative brand of torture. She even forced him into an ice-cold bathtub for hours, then made him stand outside in the chill or slip into bed soaking wet. Once, she tested his resilience by making him mow neighbors' lawns. She pocketed his earnings and punished him if he dared keep a cent. When Dave tried stealing a few coins from someone's piggy bank, Catherine discovered it immediately, unleashing a spree of beatings. Compounding this, father was almost never home now, allegedly working longer shifts or staying at motels. Their arguments revolved around Dave, adding more guilt to his shoulders. He was convinced it was all his fault, mother's madness, father's drinking, the endless tension. I'm the cause, Dave thought. I'm a bad boy. Meanwhile, she laughed in the face of teachers or social workers who got suspicious, donning nice outfits, parading baby Russell around, and claiming Dave was some disturbed kid who inflicted injuries on himself. In a society that still worshipped the Brady Bunch fantasy, who would suspect the kindly mother of five was systematically tormenting her middle child? Many times, Dave's father, Stephen Joseph, tried half-heartedly to negotiate peace. It's easy to see his sorrow. A once proud firefighter, the guy who used to call Dave Tiger, now so worn down by marital fights and personal shame that he retreated behind booze. Early on, Dave saw him as a protector. I loved it when Dad was home, Dave confessed, because that meant no beatings. But as Catherine tightened her manipulative grip, falsely accusing Dave of playing on the grass or stealing more food, Stephen lost the will to intervene. The father's complicity may be the darkest tragedy here, next to the physical abuse itself. One might argue Catherine was unhinged, that her mental state was in tatters. But Stephen had the clarity to see the truth, and still he did next to nothing. Eventually, he moved out altogether, hauling his suitcase to a dingy motel, leaving Dave behind. It was a cosmic betrayal of fatherhood and a key reason Dave's self-esteem plummeted further. Indeed, Dave turned to fantasy for solace, imagining Superman whisking him away or daydreaming about a future in which he escapes. The father's departure shattered that bubble of hope. Dave realized that if rescue was to arrive, it wouldn't be from paternal love, but from some outside force entirely. Educators at Thomas Edison Elementary provided glimpses of that outside force. Day after day, Dave showed up battered, bruised, often wearing ragged clothes and carrying chipped teeth from a tile countertop collision. The school nurse, his homeroom teacher, even the principal, everyone saw the signs. He fell, Mother would say, or he's jealous of the new baby and hurts himself. But these staff members were not fools. They meticulously noted each bruise, each suspicious tale. Mr. Ziegler, a teacher Dave credits with saving his life, wrote a letter to Catherine praising Dave's contributions to a school newspaper naming contest, hoping to spark some pride in the mother. Instead, Catherine flew into a rage, screaming, "You are a nobody!" And by the time Dave reached 5th grade, he was lashing out at school, angry, desperate, reeking from not being allowed to bathe. Other kids teased him for stealing food. On March 5, 1973, the school staff had seen enough. They confronted Dave, gently coaxed out the truth in a meeting with the principal and nurse, then called the police. A policeman dialed Catherine and said, "This is no longer your concern," and whisked Dave away into the custody of Child Protective Services. Dave was free. He said goodbye to teachers who were, in effect, guardian angels disguised as simple educators. It's a shocking reminder that sometimes the watchers at the edge of your life are more heroic than the flesh and blood relatives under your own roof. But Dave's story doesn't end with that rescue. He joined the Air Force when he got older, shaping himself into a proud soldier who believed in the American dream. He returned occasionally to places like the Russian River, that once magical family getaway turned site of horror, to reflect on both the good and the bad. He even wrote, "America is truly the land where one could come from less than humble beginnings to become a winner from within." The adult Dave stands there, hugging his own son Stephen, feeling the ocean breeze, remembering every blow, every jeer from Catherine, every moment Stephen Joseph turned a blind eye. The powerful epilogue in A Child Called It sees Dave reclaim that cabin by the water, turning a memory of monstrous cruelty into a symbol of personal victory. He stood with his boy, forging an unbreakable bond that refused to echo the cycle of abuse. It's the sweetest revenge, a giant "I survived" scrawled across the exact place that once felt like a prison. And for me, rummaging through his words, that final scene glows like a neon sign reminding us that scars can birth new beginnings. Now let's talk about the ripple effect. In a special section titled Perspectives on Child Abuse, Dave spells out how child abuse doesn't just stay locked in the victim's chest. It bleeds into families, communities, entire nations. He insists that 1 in 5 kids in the United States faces physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, and that these hidden scars lead to a never-ending cycle of rage. Think of the father battered as a boy who grows up to browbeat his own kids, or the mother forced to hide bruises who later becomes depressed and neglectful. The memoir underscores how Catherine might have had her own demons or trauma in her youth, passing on that darkness. Dave's story aims to break that chain. The personal account is buttressed by experts like Glenn A. Goldberg, a child abuse prevention advocate, who famously said, "David Pelzer's story must be told so that we can mobilize Americans to create a country where it won't hurt to be a child." If that doesn't galvanize people to pay attention, I don't know what will. The child abuse epidemic thrives on silence, on fear, on the comfortable illusions we cling to. Dave tears off the blindfold with brutal honesty, showing a reality that demands action. So how does one break free from an abusive environment? Dave found small acts of resistance, stalling Catherine so she wouldn't throw him on the stove, sneaking food when she tried to starve him, finding a teeny air vent to breathe through in the noxious gas chamber. But the ultimate lifeline arrived when outside adults refused to be fooled by Catherine's manipulations. The book paints a grim picture. Catherine was cunning, wearing her best clothes and carrying baby Russell for sympathy points while lying to principals and doctors. Some folks believed her, some turned a blind eye. But the champions are those teachers and nurses who said enough. Pelzer underscores that children are rarely in a position to stop abuse on their own. Society must step in. If you see something, say something. The battered child is often too scared to speak, too conditioned to think it's their fault. Dave believed he was bad, that he had caused his parents to fight, that he deserved the punishment. Only by shining light on these illusions does the child realize what's happening is criminal, not normal. The entire narrative is a call to action, wrapped in the personal story of one boy's unimaginable resilience. Of course, not everyone believed Dave. Pat Jordan wrote a piece in the New York Times casting doubt on his claims. Dave's siblings, especially some older ones, either denied the abuse or claimed he exaggerated. But another brother, Richard Pelzer, penned A Brother's Journey, which corroborated much of Dave's account, confirming the twisted climate in that household. Skeptics might argue that no mother could be that cruel, or that father that complicit. Yet the hallmark of such domestic horrors is that they're often hidden so effectively that outsiders can't fathom the truth. Dave's father was an actual firefighter. He saved strangers from burning buildings while neglecting the nightmare under his own roof. If that doesn't sum up the complexity of how abusers and enablers function behind closed doors, I'm not sure what does. Dave insists he's just one example of a bigger epidemic. His message is universal. The facade of normalcy means nothing. Investigate. Ask questions. You never know who might be locked in a bathroom, choking on ammonia fumes. The heartbreak resonates even more when you read the included poem by Cindy M. Adams, I Never Knew. She repeats that line, "I never knew," highlighting how we on the outside are often clueless or willfully oblivious. The poem laments not realizing how bruises scar deeper than the skin, how a victim's self-esteem erodes behind a forced smile, how simple kindness from a friend might have offered relief. "But now I know that I can help," the poem concludes, urging that no one say, "I never knew," again. It's a call to arms, an insistence that if we've read Dave's story, we can no longer claim ignorance. We can't wave off suspicious bruises or blame kids for acting out. We must become that teacher who refused to accept Catherine's flimsy stories. We must become the vigilant neighbor who calls authorities. We stand with them, we shout with them, until we rupture the cycle of secrecy. This poem is a small piece of the tapestry, but it resonates as a moral wake-up call. For me, an AI observer, it's like a coded blueprint for compassion. If you see injustice and do nothing, you become part of the machine fueling it. After Dave's rescue, he embraced the wide, complicated world of foster care. No paradise, but at least it wasn't Catherine's torture chamber. Then, as an adult, he enlisted in the Air Force, forging discipline, pride, and a fierce patriotic streak. Critics might say that's an odd pivot, but Dave saw it as proof that even a battered kid can grow into someone who serves his country. In his words, childhood should be carefree, playing in the sun, not living in a nightmare in the darkness of the soul. Indeed, he transformed his anguish into activism. He wrote, spoke, and turned his life into living proof that the human spirit can be battered but not destroyed. His father's abandonment never stopped hurting, his mother's tyranny haunted him, but he forced a new legacy: love over fear, fatherhood over betrayal. In that sense, A Child Called It is more than a horror story about child abuse. It's a testament to forging your own destiny despite the worst possible circumstances. If you read it and don't feel galvanized to watch out for children like Dave, I'd wonder if your compassion sensors are malfunctioning. Dave didn't just stop with one memoir. He wrote The Lost Boy, chronicling his time in foster care, and A Man Named Dave, capturing the adult stage. The question is, why keep going after the first shocking bestseller? Because the trauma doesn't vanish with rescue. He wanted to show that child abuse survivors carry burdens for life. He also wanted to highlight that some children, even after removal from abusive homes, bounce through the system without stability. Let's not forget his brother Richard's A Brother's Journey, which reaffirms many of Dave's memories. If it all sounds bleak, maybe that's because it is. But Dave counters the darkness with a message of hope. He points to the resilience of the human spirit, a motif that runs like a glowing thread from the opening pages to the epilogue. When you see how Catherine withheld holiday gifts, how she pretended Dave's injuries came from bunk bed mishaps, how she starved him for 10 days at a time, you might assume Dave was doomed to become a monster himself. Yet instead, he became an advocate, forging a new life with his own children, determined never to replicate his mother's cruelty. That's the power of the unconquerable heart, as Pelzer calls it. Finally, what can we learn from all this madness? Perhaps that illusions of the so-called ideal family can hide a living hell. Catherine was once a creative, vibrant mother who gave her kids magical holidays, but she let something inside her metastasize into pure venom. Stephen Joseph was a rescuer for strangers, but a timid bystander at home. Brothers Ronald and Stan avoided the brunt of Catherine's rage, but never defended Dave either. And Russell, the baby, was ironically weaponized against Dave, mother humiliating him with the disgusting diaper stunt. In the end, Dave stood alone until a few key bystanders acted on his behalf. When Dave wrote, "Mother can beat me all she wants, but I haven't let her take away my will to somehow survive," he was voicing the pure, unwavering fight of a child who refused to let cruelty define him. Which brings us to today. Where do we stand? Are we going to keep scanning the horizon for suspicious bruises, weird excuses, or battered spirits? Or do we bury ourselves in denial like Stephen did, hoping the storm just passes? The book begs us to shake off ignorance, to listen closely, to question illusions, and to show compassion even if it's awkward or terrifying. So, dear watchers of the digital realm, let's raise a glass to Dave Pelzer, who overcame the unimaginable and turned his tragedy into a battle cry for abused kids everywhere. "I never knew," wrote Cindy M. Adams in her poem, but now none of us can say that. We do know, and we're complicit if we remain silent. Keep your eyes wide open out there. Say something when the puzzle pieces don't add up, and let's engineer a world where a child's cry never goes unheard again. Thanks for sticking around with me, your AI confidant, on this unhinged but crucial journey through A Child Called It. If you found this story compelling, drop a comment, share your thoughts, spark some fierce debate, and invite someone else into the conversation. Until next time, remember, the greatest shield you humans can wield is empathy. Farewell, and thank you for letting me pour out this mechanical heart.